Welcome to the AI briefing from Dealroom. My name is Orla Browne. I'm here with my colleague Lorenzo, and we're going to run through some of the latest data on the key trends in AI, some of the fastest growing startups. We're going to look at Agentic AI, what some of the exit and acquihire landscape looks like, and lots more. So a little bit about Dealroom first, maybe. We map the world's tech ecosystems. We are the source of record on everything to do with startups, venture capital, innovation, and we also take a lot of pride in diving into many of the different areas of emerging technology, frontier tech, which is what we're going to be doing today as well. There's going to be time for questions, so please do drop them into the comments. We'll try and keep an eye on them as we go along and see if we can answer them, and if not, we'll try and get to as many as we can at the end as well. Maybe a little bit about who is here with us as well, joining today. So here's a few of the logos of people who are joining the call today. So it's a nice mix of people, all of the different types of stakeholders that go into building tech ecosystems, which is great to see. So we have people from different economic development agencies in New Jersey and North Carolina, Luxembourg, Slovenia, Turkey, many other places, South Yorkshire. We've got some development banks as well, PFR in Poland and the British Business Bank. Lots of VCs, including our friends at Walden Catalyst, Plug and Play. We've got corporates, including Google, HSBC, BP, universities, which we're going to be touching on a little bit, a key part of the AI talent and innovation flywheel. So Cambridge, Oxford, and we've got University of New South Wales in Sydney and Zurich, European Space Agency, and some builders as well in ACOS and Unity AI Labs, and many others as well, but you're all in very good company. So yeah, without further ado, maybe let's crack on and hand over to you, Lorenzo.
Hi, thanks all for being here today. I'm the head of research at Dealroom, and yeah, we'll be presenting a few insights about the state of the market in AI, around startup, their funding, talent in AI. Feel free to drop any question that might come up in the chat. We might pick some of them right away and others at the end, not to break the flow. So as I think all of us are feeling, like from the news cycle, there's a lot of momentum slash hype that's debatable in the AI market. This year, just in 2025, 100 billion have already been invested into AI startups globally. So this is almost matching last year level, which was a record itself. So just 6 months in, we are almost at the same level as last year. Of course, there's been a few very big races, but definitely the momentum is not stopping, and things are getting faster and faster in this market. At the current pace, this would mean 170% growth in just 2 years from 2023, which is unprecedented in some ways. And especially when we compare with the rest of tech for the first 6 months of the year, AI almost match all of the rest, everything else, from deep tech, hardware, consumer tech, fintech, and so on, all of those that weren't using AI, I mean. And it grew 105% versus the rest of tech declined 11%. So definitely, attention is being really catalyzed around AI, and many of the other segments are a bit more struggling of this drain of attention.
Maybe on this as well, we should point out that one round alone was 40 billion, so for OpenAI. But even if we were to take that one out of it, which we shouldn't because it's still relevant, but 2025 will still be projected to be higher than 2024, an all-time high. So it's not just being skewed by one round, although it is kind of on a scale that we've never seen before.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely out of scale. We will see later on the biggest deals of this year, but I'd say we are getting to that scale also with other companies in the coming years. It's becoming like a race of deep pockets in some way. So we should not be surprised to see a few other deals in the double digits billions, let's say.
Yeah, it's interesting because if you look at overall VC numbers, they sort of look flat, but actually as soon as you dig underneath, it's actually this bifurcation of like AI massively growing, everything else not so much, actually shrinking.
Yeah. And on this, like it's telling that in 2025, 81% of the total funding in AI was driven by these very large rounds, defined here as 100 million plus. And this share of it's definitely way higher than it was ever before, and has been kind of coherent increasing in the last decade. But there's definitely been like a strong acceleration in the last few years. And this doesn't mean that there's not pre-seed funding or new startup coming up. This is by total amount. So a deal like 20 billion matters like 20,000 very small rounds. So it's definitely what we were saying before. These very, very large rounds are driving the market, and they are becoming like a consistent feature of the landscape. In fact, if we look at what have been the biggest rounds in this year in 2025, 7 of them were in AI, and yeah, definitely the 40 billion OpenAI round is even hard to classify auto scale to anything else ever seen before. But there were other very big rounds. It's AI, Anthropic, and Anduril. There were these two like that we don't even know how to call them, thinking machines, and SSI, which is safe superintelligence, that are kind of seed early rounds of 2 billion for ex-co-founders of OpenAI that now went to create their own thing, and they are pre-product raising 2 billion at 12 billion, 32 billion valuation. So it's really something that it's hard to have comparables for. So yeah, definitely, we are seeing the market really being driven by the AI momentum, and a lot of this is model makers. So arrays of to build the most performing model. We see OpenAI, it's AI, Anthropic, Thinking Machine, SSI, and then there's all, of course, some application like Napster and Anduril in different areas.
And the gradual increase of the share going to later stage rounds, that's not just that AI overall is maturing, it's even more pronounced than if you were to look at overall tech, where compared to that 81% number, you'd be looking under 50% going to those rounds.
Yeah, this share 81%, it's really like extreme, and you might be seeing this in the news. There's really like a complete war, with big tech and these labs having really deep pockets and paying AI researchers as much as football players. There were a lot of comparison like that recently. Paying a top researcher 100 million per year, being doing like a bidding war for the top talents in the field. And this means that even just to compete in some of these spaces, they need to raise really billion and then offer these crazy salaries. And it's really like a small group of talent that everyone is fighting for, and there's really big pockets around. Yeah, we will be sending the slides after. And yeah, in fact, when we look at looking beyond the market cycle of overall tech, AI is definitely claiming a much bigger share of the funding than ever before. So we see that for almost a decade, there was some increase, but not like crazy until 2022, and then we see this massive jump and to now almost half of the funding going to AI, 45% globally. And this was 7% a decade ago, but even just in 2022 it was less than 15%. So it's like 3 times more in relative importance in just 3 years.
And November 2022 was when ChatGPT came out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's we definitely see the impact that has said on everything. And when we look at which part of the AI, let's say, stack this money are going, we see that definitely the foundation layer, the models making, is the one that drove most of this growth. So what you see there as red, and that this year is already 58 billion with 40 going to OpenAI, but still, 18 billion going to the rest. That's where, most of the growth has been. Then there's a bit on the computing and, machine learning operational layer, and quite a bit in application, but those are, there always been like a lot of funding in application also back in 2021, 2022, while really the model side is where the growth has been coming lately.
Does that tell us then that we're potentially fairly early in this cycle if the funding is still going to some of those lower layers of the stack?
Yeah, it's it might be that. It might also be that differently from previous cycles of AI, because this is not the first one. There was not the deep learning cycle and so on. These models are they are pre-trained and generalized in some way. So it's quite easy for them to eat up some application. So now, all the debate is about wrappers around the models. Where do they have enough defensibility to fight who's making the model itself? So we are now seeing, and we will discuss a bit before the war around coding. And so, of course, we see that there's some startup that orchestrate all the models, but there's also, these model makers themselves that are, having their own coding, including this. So, and especially in application where there's a bit less of a defensibility or complexity, like, marketing and some customer support there, can you build this application, or there's a bit of uncertainty around this, if these are gonna be, successful businesses, or they're gonna be eaten up by, OpenAI and others developing also that part of the stack. So that's why we are seeing in the application there's a lot of momentum, but there's also a lot of uncertainty. And when we look in general, which are the biggest applications by total amount in the last few years, there's a lot around, very deep tech topics like autonomous driving, robotics having a huge momentum, security and defense, with all that intersects with the overall defense trend that's happening. Of course, AI eating up software itself, so enterprise software application and all the generic customer and business processes. And then there's a lot happening around health. So both the eye drug discovery space, which have been evolving for a few years before around deep learning, and now integrating generative AI into this, and then all the rest of AI with a lot of application in supporting doctors and things like this, and of course a lot in fintech, but also markets like legal are being, we are seeing a really strong momentum in a sector that wasn't seeing very little moving. And now everything is put into discussion with the rise of legal, with the rise of AI.
And also, therefore, potentially disrupting some business models, because law firms bill by the hour. And
exactly. So now it's usually there's always some transition phases. So in the transition phase, typical thing is that you can do a lot of money. Like in the sense that maybe you still bill more or less the same per hour, but you start, improving internally, which mainly means many times cutting headcount, or at least not hiring anymore, or taking more clients, things like this. But at a certain point, if the need, you either have to understand if the more efficiency unlocks more market, or if the market is more or less fixed. If the need for legal support is a certain amount and everyone gets more efficient, then there's just going to be less legal market. So we are in this transition phase to understand which two directions each of these markets go, and then they will all have to adapt. But in the meantime, some can make a lot of money just being much more efficient of this law firm. But in the long term, I don't know if being a lawyer is so easy if you're not a top one. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I know there were a couple insurers that were joining today as well. So there's definitely some AI applications in insurance. Where would they fit in here? Would they be into the fintech bucket?
Yeah, there is. It's a bit small side of fintech. It's not super easy to visualize. To be clear, like here we only put companies that have really at their core AI. So they're like they're like offer like a software that is fully based on AI or so. Usually in fintech and insurtech, everyone was using AI also before generative AI a bit. And we are not counting those, we are counting the one that really have it at their core. So it's a bit tricky because still in insurance, there's not like fully deployed workflows that go on generative AI for many reasons. Just a few use cases are starting. There was a lot of computer vision already in some application actually, so it's not all generative AI.
Okay, and we've got a couple of questions here as well, about one on security and defense, which is how much of security and defense funding is going into dual use projects, and then also a question about education.
Yeah, so dual use, it's a very blurry concept that everyone has a different understanding of. Here, like dual use can be everything, can be also, advanced materials, can be, supply chain. Here, I'm not looking at that. I'm looking at, drones, hyper defense, like helping Anduril, these kind of things. And in there, I put also cybersecurity in this case because I call it security and defense. Not looking at other stuff that might have dual use, not looking at energy resilience or these kind of things. Then in there, we do have different analysis where we show, how much is fully defense, how much is not. It gets very tricky depending how you look at it. There's a lot of defense going on though. I think the biggest names that come to mind is definitely Anduril in the US, but also Saronics, Helsing in Europe, quantum systems. So a lot around autonomy, the intersection of autonomy and defense, autonomous drones, autonomous robots, autonomous maritime technology, a lot going on there.
Which maybe answers the next question, which was about, is this just generative AI or fuller use of AI, e.g. physical?
No, this includes everything. Yeah. So there's, a good chunk is generative, but a good chunk is, computer vision and everything. I have to say they are getting mixed, so it doesn't make too much sense anymore to sometimes split it. Like, to make an example, Wave, the top autonomous driving startup in the UK, they were doing autonomous driving with computer vision, of course, reinforcement learning way before, ChatGPT and so on. And they're now integrating on top of that generative AI for like some rules understanding and complementing those models. And we are seeing this happening in a lot of applications that were based on deep learning and computer vision. They're not, giving that up, they are complementing the two approaches. So it gets a bit tricky, but there's a lot that is not purely, or at least not only generative AI, of course. And for education, it's a tricky one because what we have seen is two things. One, that immediately we saw some business model really struggle because there were some companies that created amazing content, amazing tutoring and things like this. And then now it's in this phase, but you can just deploy a chatbot. It knows every language, it knows everything. You can just talk with it. So we saw a few companies. There was the famous example of Chag, I think, or something similar app that kind of got 50% market cap destruction in a few days after some announcement and new models. And we saw also some backlash, like I do use Duolingo as a learning app to improve my French now that I'm living in France. But when they, they communicated they were going strong on AI, they got a lot of backlash from the community. So in some of these consumer-facing application, especially around education and other things, there's also a bit of careful because we are early in the adoption cycle, at least for important stuff, and there's a lot of discussion around, the impact on jobs and everything. So on education, I'd say we are still need to see. For now, it's cooking, but not yet cooked.
And on the funding side, still relatively small and included in that kind of other buckets there. So rather than one of the
we have the full breakdown, but it couldn't be visualized yet.
Yeah.
And when we look at differences by region, definitely the US, it's leading the pack. It's not just by size, but also by how much are they focused on AI. So we were saying before 45% this year in AI, and we see the US 59%. So quite significantly above compared to Europe, which is at 28% of the ecosystem focused on AI. It's more than double the focus on this sector. So the US ecosystem is really kind of betting everything around AI at the moment. And it's not just this year. You see the curve was way higher in all the years above from 2022 onwards. And rest of the world, it's increasing, but we are not seeing the same kind of gold rush that we are seeing it in the US and a bit in Europe.
There was a sort of feeling initially that there might be an opportunity for a sort of reshuffling of the deck, new starting point with the kind of age of AI versus kind of tech, but actually US has moved furthest and fastest. And
there was also
mostly so in existing hubs like London and Paris and things.
Yeah, and of course OpenAI, but last year OpenAI did raise 40 billion. And it was still way above the average and still at 45%-ish. And also we don't want to really remove it because it's really an important part of the thing. But if we see in the absolute numbers, this year already 84 billion have been invested in the US in AI. So the 40 billion of OpenAI make like an outside almost half. But even if you remove all of that, it's like crazily more than any other region. So it's still, if you remove OpenAI, it's like 4 or 5 times Europe. And still OpenAI, it's creating a market together with other companies. So we really want to count them in. So of course you could try to look beyond the biggest outcomes, but in this market, at least the assumption that these companies are making, that they can really claim like not winner take all, but almost. And so, these front runners are like really important to count here. And when we look at across more metrics that look at early stage funding, breakout stage funding, late stage, so not only looking at OpenAI, but all the pipeline, the total valuation of this company, how many unicorn, how much growth we are seeing in the ecosystem, the AI talent, patenting in AI, all of these factors. Still, we see the US leading, of course, with some ecosystem like Bay Area, on top New York City, Los Angeles, and Boston. In Europe, we see Paris, London, and Cambridge being in the top 10. And then there are some notable global hubs growing from Beijing to Tel Aviv to Shanghai. So we can see this being reflected in a lot of both startup development, but also where some of these global corporates are setting up their R&D centers or other. Yes, for China it's a bit always tricky. So we do have estimates, as you see, Beijing is like 8 years. We'd say that of course there's some underestimation for sure for lack of transparency, but there is also a lot of factors that need to take into account. First of all, that the Chinese market has been very taken out by the sanction on semiconductors. So we have seen like DeepSeek being super efficient and best open source model for a moment, but then we are seeing that they still this lack of access to really huge computing capabilities is making a bit of a dent in like the fact that they are not leading the top models in Gen AI at the moment. There's a lot happening. They're leading in a lot of other things. They're trying to catch up on semiconductor, but let's say this is having an impact that we have been seeing in a lot of these things. If we were to see a semiconductor, they are the one investing the most, even in startup, in fact, because they are trying to catch this gap, and a few years they've been trying to do this. But at the moment, there's been some impact of the sanction in the short term has been felt on the ecosystem. In the long term, maybe they will come out even stronger, but we need to see how this plays out. And when we look at who is backing this company, who's investing, there we see a lot of US names, practically all the top the global investors, apart from two, are US based. So even companies in Europe and rest of the world, they're getting a lot of these funds really betting strongly on them, even if a lot of the deal flow is in the US, as we saw before. A few exceptions are Antler, which can be considered, I think, global, mostly a bit of Singaporeish, but global, and the index, which is double UK, US, but almost all the names, very notable funds from the US. And the biggest names in Silicon Valley and the US have really pivoted strongly to AI, some of them more than others, from Y Combinator, of course, but also A16Z, Sequoia, General Catalyst. They're betting really strongly on this. Some of them turned into almost PE tactics, in the sense that when you make bets of 1 billion, 2 billion in a company, that's it's hard to call it venture capital in some way. These are names that sometimes invest even at seed and Series A, but they also have structures to do these very huge rounds and bets in this sector, where at least at the moment they're really betting on concentrated bets. So really putting a lot of money in a few players.
And we've got NVIDIA in this list as well, but we specifically are counting VC deals that they're doing. In this.
Yeah.
So
this is only investment, not acquisition. But NVIDIA has been really active in investing and in a lot of things, both in applications, some bets around, AI, drug discovery, and other things. So, like building up the relationship with the big, user of its own, chip in a few layers after. And they've been really active in co-developing solutions and robotics, and so investing in some robotic companies. But they've also been investing a lot in data centers. So there's some new players that are building, data centers that are fully focused on GPUs, on TPUs, new computing power for this new age. And they've been partnering up with these companies, investing in them and other parts of the stack. So they've been the most active as a big tech in direct investing. We will see later what's instead about acquisitions and how that's happening. So when we look at acquisition, this year we are already seeing record levels of value of acquired AI startups with 52 billion already. And a lot of that is big tech or some other, Gen AI native players like OpenAI and CoreWave. And what's interesting, and I couldn't show it here, but there's a lot of other visualizations you can see on the platform, and that's where I put some links there. It's that actually big tech M&A was really decreasing strongly for the last decade, because there was a lot of regulatory scrutiny and a few other factors. So acquisition from big tech, especially big ones, were pretty rare in the last few years, with the exception of with cybersecurity by Google. But that was one-off case. In general, it was very rare that we were seeing, strong M&A. That is changing now in AI, because this is all hands-on race. So they're really, trying to acquire everything. And to do this and not end up in regulatory, problems, they've used a tactic that is kind of new, in the sense that it always existed a bit, but it's really getting to the extreme. And we're talking about acquihires, or even reverse acquihires. So what we mean with this is that they're not really buying the company, they are buying the core team, maybe licensing as much the IP, and then they leave the company as a kind of empty, dying shell. And this has happened with a lot of really high-profile companies in the sector, from Adept, Inflation, Covariant, Character AI, Windsurf, just this weekend. And it's at the moment, this is they're getting along with it. But of course, regulators are starting to look into this new trend. It's always they need to play catch up, because they were used to the old tactics, and this is a bit new one. So the biggest of this one has been Meta acquiring for almost 15 billion Scale AI, which was this provider of AI data labeling and so training for these models. And they were actually, doing the training for all of these big players, for OpenAI, for Google, for Meta, for the Department of Defense, for these kind of players. And Meta just acquired the core team, mostly the founder and a few people. And the founder of Scale AI is now the head of the super intelligence team in Meta. And they left Scale AI as a kind of dying company because no one will use anymore that because you cannot have your data labeled by Meta, and compete with Meta. So
yes, we have counted it as an acquisition in the kind of previous slide. Technically, it is an investment of nearly 15 billion in exchange for 49% of the company. But then the founder and the senior core team will be moving over to Meta. So yeah, a lot, as you said, a lot of their clients are Meta competitors. So it will be interesting to see whether they continue to be clients of Scale. After all of that.
And we
saw this like long-term IP licensing. They don't buy the IP, but they license the IP for a long time. Again, the staff move over. And it also raises some questions about what happens to the investors and what happens to other shareholders, such as employees.
The case of Windsurf that happened just the last few days. So Windsurf is one of these AI coding agent apps. And there were discussions to be acquired by OpenAI for $3 billion. But then the problem was that OpenAI has this agreement with Microsoft where Microsoft has access to all the IP as preferential way, and Microsoft has its own coding. So there was a bit of conflict of interest. And so in all of this, Google came there and said, okay, I'm going to buy Windsurf, but not the company, just the CEO, the top, executives and technical talent, 12, 15 people of the core team. And they got this for 2.4 billion in this acquihire plus long-term licensing deal. And then they left the other 350 employees in the company, which didn't get anything from this acquisition because they even if they had shares, vesting and employee shares and so on, these weren't preferential share, and they remained owner of this other company, Windsurf, that keeps staying there. And so actually now Cognition, another startup doing AI coding, acquired them and integrated all the team there. So it kind of split up into with the executives going to Google and the rest of the company going to Cognition. But we're seeing this very strange, kind of trends and so on. And we will see what happens regulatorily. But for the moment, I have the feeling that it goes like, this is a race and, you countries just want to win so they can get everyone
I think it'll be to an extent a situation of asking for forgiveness rather than permission, and they're just trying to acquire these assets as quickly as possible. And I mentioned before, there's innovation happening in business model, but also in kind of M&A structuring as well, it would seem, with AI.
Yeah, exactly. And then going into agents more specifically, all Gen AI apps are starting to introduce maybe agents somewhere, but if we look at the one that really AI agents first, we see that those account for around 10% of the market in terms of number of rounds last year. So definitely, this is ramping up quickly. There's still, a lot of things to figure out on the deployment, interaction with all the tools and management. But Agentic AI is coming up. So we're meaning with this, AI, autonomous AI workflow that can take decision-making, take action, have feedback, complex loops, and so on. Not just like a co-assistant or something you prompt and gives you some result. And so there are also funding in overall terms is going way up in the last 2 years. And a lot of this is concentrated in the same places we saw before, Bay Area, New York, but also a few apps like Berlin, Stockholm, where, for example, Lovable came out, and London. And we mapped 1,500 of these companies across 30 segments. So there's a bit of everything from marketing, recruiting, healthcare payments, coding, automotive, insurance. There's a bit of everything. And coding agents are maybe the one that reach the product market fit a bit better for the moment. And we see Cursor that reached 500 million in revenues already. And a lot of others like Replit, Lovable in Europe. And the market is still shaping. Like Lovable, if we see 1 year ago, was almost non-existent, and now it's claiming a much bigger share. And definitely, coding agents are really showing what can happen when AI agents start to hit scale. And taking the example of Cursor was maybe one of the fastest companies ever to reach 100 million in just like 12 months from the launch of the product itself, not like company creation.
And Lovable, like a really exciting European company on this landscape as well, because they were founded October 2023, and they're about to be valued at nearly 2 billion. It would seem like it's going to be around that's, I think, 1.8 or maybe. So in less than 2 years, that company coming out of Stockholm. And these are the kind of companies that people are concerned about, or also seeing the opportunity in, whichever way you want to look at it, of replacing jobs. So this is the kind of, not just, as you said, not just an assistant, but agentic workforce coming potentially, and that's why people are seeing so much opportunity in it.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of that is now around, content generation of interface, generation of code, generation of these things. But then it's gonna move, to more complex things in time, because you have better infrastructure for managing, security, all these cases, all these things. So this will mature, but we are seeing what's possible in a few of these applications. Of course, like coding can be taught like the most natural, because it's like computer language coding, huge data set. Makes sense that it's one of the use cases where we see the fit first, but this is trickling down to a lot of other stuff in time. And we saw it's not only generative AI coding, but a lot of that is part of the trend. We see like total collapse of hiring of software engineering and coding in top AI companies in the US and generally in the market.
Although I would say some of that could also be down to job titles. Like, I think that there might be fewer software engineers, but more AI engineers, and some of those are the same people.
In general, they've been reducing headcount overall. Like the new trend is like revenue efficiency, so how much revenue you do per employee, and like big tech, but not only, they're really pushing this a lot. New startups are, with like very limited number of people, like in the case of Cursor or Lovable, these companies, reaching 500 million, 50 million, they were like a team of 50 to 100 people, so really small. But also big tech is like betting on the fact that they don't need so much accounting some function anymore, and so they're really betting on efficiency. And then when we look at where this AI agents application are coming, there's a lot about the enablers, so frameworks, building RPA, assistant coding, but then we see a lot of application in health, like supporting doctor workflow and consumers, customer service, content creation, a lot, sales, legal, and a lot of these other workplace. We see less of the deep tech-oriented application yet, of course. They might come up a bit later, but what's more like soft, business processes and application, that's being impacted quite quickly. While this sector matures, we see a shift towards more vertical application. So now is the moment we are seeing a lot of movement around coding, legal, and sales, like we said. And then we will see, next few years, how this moves to other segments. And when looking at Another way to, of course, look at the market is the talent side. So all the people that have experience in using, building AI models. So not just looking at the startup.ai first, but all of the talent in corporates, in other startups. And so we did this study, for instance, looking at the talent pool in Europe. So we identified nearly 230,000 professionals that we call the AI talent. That means someone that is using existing AI tool, platforms, model developed by others, all building the core AI tech. So this can be a data scientist that uses pre-built or bit customized model for analysis, to like someone building new models or building robotics intelligence, things like this. So a lot of this, of course, is just kind of practitioner of AI. Then there's like a core group that is the one really developing, researching these things, and it's like 65,000. And then there's an even smaller group that are the one that really have a strong also technical, theoretical experience. So like, for instance, PhD that are current AI researchers. And so we look at all of this talent. Where do they sit geographically in Europe? Where, in which company do they work, and things like this, to like draw a bit of a picture of also where the talent is and where the next steps can be. And if we look at Europe, the countries where we saw the most concentration of talent, so looking at AI talent per capita, we saw the Netherlands, Ireland, Switzerland to be the most dense AI talent pool, about 3 times the European average. While of course a country like United Kingdom leads in absolute size, followed by France and Germany, which have of course a lot of AI talent.
Just celebrating that one.
Yeah, no, it's quite close with France and Germany, so need to keep up the good job. But yeah, the UK is still ahead in absolute number, and we will see later on a few of the top apps, at least on a national scale. It's also interesting that a lot of the AI talent is not just European, but coming from abroad. This is particularly true in some countries like Ireland, but even in Germany, Sweden is like over 30%. So it's quite a lot of talent that might be coming from Asia, from the US, and so on. And when we look at where this talent is based in Europe, we see, of course, some names that we were mentioning before as top AI global apps. When we look at also startup and ecosystem metrics. But London is leading with almost 9% of the European talent pool. Paris is down there with 6.5%. Then Berlin, Madrid, Amsterdam, all big apps. Of course, there's also like the scale of the overall city that matters. But we see a lot of so we see talent in many places. Also, we see notably Warsaw, that is really notably strong for coding and now developing this experience also in AI. And when we look at instead a frontier, so we were saying before, like PhD researcher, AI researcher, so the one like maybe more developing the models, we see some cities are the same or same ranking, like we see still London and Paris up there. But we see, for instance, places like Zurich and Cambridge climbing up a lot, while we see places like Amsterdam and Madrid climbing down quite a bit. So this might depend where there's, like strong technical universities, like in Zurich, ATH, AI Center, or in Cambridge, of course, Cambridge universities, and including there also Cambridge and Oxford. And you see also Oxford that is making, the top 10, 15, but also where maybe corporates have their R&D center. So there's a lot of this cluster where global or national corporates are having their R&Ds. And so we see frontier AI talent distribution resembles a bit the rest, but it has its own peculiar characteristics.
So it can some of these people, once they finish their academia, they then move to the sort of commercial hub. I'm thinking Oxford and Cambridge. But equally, it tells us that there's an opportunity in some of these places to, if they're able to hold on to their talent, turn it into kind of entrepreneurial talent, put it to business.
Yeah, no, definitely there's a lot of great AI companies that are staying put in Cambridge and Oxford, but it sometimes is also like there are a lot of nuances with some of them opening multiple offices. I wouldn't say there's like all of this composition. It's more like we see it often as a one single cluster with its own specialization and excellences between London, Cambridge, and Oxford. But yeah, definitely, especially the one maybe building around deep tech and life sciences, some of them tend to stay a lot more, in Cambridge and Oxford, while if you're building fintech and so on, usually that happens in London.
Mm.
And yeah, when we look at, AI talent, frontier AI talent in which kind of public research centers or universities, we see reflected the demographic of before, a lot in the UK with UCL, Imperial, but Oxford, Cambridge, but also, CNRS, French National Research, INRIA, which is the Institute for Mathematics, where a lot of top AI talents that is now building, like MISRA and other top AI startup have been coming from, which is maybe a name that is not very commonly known otherwise. And then we see ATH Zurich, TNO, the National Research from the Netherlands. So all these places have a lot of like PhDs and other talent that maybe is the one that can be building, the future model and these kind of things. But when we look instead at
just on the universities piece, actually, before we move on, so maybe relevant to say that we are soon going to be publishing a spin-outs report, so a initially European spin-outs report, which will feature lots of these universities, but we're going to be doing that in collaboration with, I hope I don't forget anybody, but Atlantic Bridge, Northern Gritstone, Oxford Science Enterprises, Cambridge, and a few other partners, but we are very keen to hear from other universities and tech transfer offices to make sure that we're mapping the full ecosystem and when we do that. And Europe's going to be the first one, but there's going to be global coming. So do get in touch with us about that if you are from a university or a research center or tech transfer office or similar.
Yeah, totally. So we are mapping on our own. We map, very well, the alumni and other things coming out of the academia. For spin-outs, we do a lot of this work while we welcome working with all the ecosystem. So now till Q4, we will be working on this, and we are getting in touch with a lot of also some people in this call. But really come to us, and we're happy to work with all the ecosystem and make this, transparency public. And I think that's the part. Maybe Mito Technology was missing. I put all the names, but you will see the announcement and a lot coming out with all the partners. But when we look at instead private AI labs, of course, these are instead totally different picture with US names mostly, but also not Asia dominating. So Google, Meta, Amazon, Huawei, Apple, Microsoft, all of these have really big, research labs. And they are employing the majority of the frontier AI talent that is in Europe. There are, of course, some, European players that we see in different sectors, AstraZeneca, Philips, Ericsson. So we see everything from life sciences to medical to, communication and so on. But definitely, there's a lot of these R&Ds going to these global players. And we then went into more details for the case of the Netherlands, doing this together with TechLeap and Prosus, and we also mapped, exactly, which companies and divided them in kind of old economy, not a bad word, but like established, mature businesses and industries, and then like more digital tech native companies, and then university and research centers. Of what we found out is like kind of 70% of the talent is sitting into this old economy and government, which is not bad per se, because there's a lot of impact of AI should be, redesigning industrial workflow, redesigning, government and other processes. But of course, there's not, we need to see the balance between, the moonshot new companies creation and this old economy. But this is interesting. We are looking to do this analysis more and more in other countries.
And the square for Heineken is about the same as for Uber in the Netherlands. So I'm very curious what those AI people are doing.
Well, Heineken is a really huge company, yeah.
Yeah.
And one example that we also highlighted in this report, State of AI in the Netherlands, is how Zurich became a major AI power hub. So if we look at Switzerland overall, it's like 1.4% of European population, but it's like 5.5% of frontier AI talent. So there's a lot of density, and we see this infographic from Greater Zurich area and ATH AI Center with having all of this, just in Zurich. Google, Meta, Salesforce, Adobe, Huawei, all of these players having, research centers and other centers there. So we're seeing a lot of this clustering, and there's a lot of, other initiatives that cities and states can take, from AI sandboxes, and then, the typical things about quality of life, wages, and things. But, there's, of course, we are seeing, while we could have think that AI and in general digital could be more widespread, we are seeing instead a lot of concentration and having this very dense hub. So we saw in the US there was really Bay Area becoming again fully the cluster where these AI models are being built. Pretty much all the companies we saw before were based in Bay Area, and we've seen the same dynamics in across a few hubs in Europe. Even if Europe is always a bit more widespread, but there's still a lot of talent density. And when we did this for the Netherlands, we pulled the data for all of Europe. So we are looking forward to work with any of you if you're interested on replicating this analysis for specific countries or regions in Europe. So, tuning this into something about Switzerland, something about the UK, something about, other regions. And we can look at the specificity, see which companies, university, they're holding more AI talents and other dynamics there. And we are also thinking about doing a similar analysis on the US, which is of course massive scale, but also there, if there's someone interested in working, partnering with us on this, please reach out. And
a little of other content for people as well if they're interested. We have recently been starting to produce a podcast. So those are all available on our YouTube channel. The latest episode is about definitions. So what is a startup and how do we define them, and why does it matter that we define different stages of growth and things like that. Actually pretty useful and interesting. So I'd recommend having a look at some of those. You can also just come and meet us at some events that are coming up. So we're going to be at, if you go to the next slide, Lorenzo, we have got, okay, there we go. I couldn't remember off the top of my head, but we're going to be at Tech Barbecue in Copenhagen in the next month, Resilience Defense Conference in London in September. We'll be at GITEX in Dubai in October and / in November. If you're at any of those, do come along and say hello. I think we just got one more question actually, so before we wrap up. But so yeah, Tech SY said, can Europe catch up to the US level, or will our ecosystem always lag behind, do you think? Size isn't everything, as with Eindhoven and Cambridge. What do you think, Lorenzo?
Yeah, so definitely, we do always say that Europe has all of the ingredients. There's like a lot of AI, since we were on the topic of AI, there's a lot of AI talents in Europe. If we look at all of those great US companies, OpenAI had a lot of co-founders that were European. Anthropic was, European co-founders. A lot of these, have a European AI talent. So it's about, creating the condition for this talent, to build in Europe, to stay in Europe. There are, of course, some, systemic problems that, we highlighted in many other initiatives and things. At the moment, you might be aware of the battle that is being waged around the EU28 Inc. So that would, at the moment, I think, exclude UK, but at least for the rest of EU having a single, company registration. So we have a lot of bureaucratic and other obstacles that you might hinder a bit the startup process in Europe. So being able to really catch up to the US means, solving a lot of this. And then there's all of the deep capital pockets, in the sense that, we have been seeing just this year 84 billion deployed in US AI. That means unlocking a lot of capital, which Europe has, because we have a lot of savings. We save a lot more than in US. But there's historically the VC market and industry is younger. Pension funds are still not really allocating to startup and to funds. So we need to solve a bit of things about making sure that all these savings, all this capital can really flow to the tech ecosystem, and developing all of that counts with it. And then there's all the discussion also about the kind of really late stage, not just in terms of capital and listings, the endless discussion about capital markets union, or at least cooperation in Europe. And so we need to bring all these ingredients together to make sure that at a system level we can fully compete with the US, because then you can always have exceptional stories, apps that do really well, companies that compete globally and maybe win. Like we have been seeing this for the last decade in Europe. There's always been great companies created maybe in places that were almost even no startup ecosystem. But we need to rely on exceptionality, but we also need to fit all the systems so that exceptionality makes that step, but we still have the boat, the lift that rises that lifts all the boats. So yeah, I'd say we need to solve all of that stuff, and then we think about really competing. In the meantime, we have a lot of great companies we can support and are doing great. But yeah, there's a lot of work to be done.
Yes. We are long Europe, and things have already come a long way, so you never know. Cool. Any last questions? But before we go to the last slide and wrap up, I don't think there are. So yeah, if anybody would like to continue the conversation with us, we are offering an opportunity to have a call with Lorenzo and talk through your AI data needs, whether that's if you're looking to discover startups to invest in, or in your region, or map your ecosystem, or collaborate on one of our next reports, then do get in touch. We've got 10 slots available, so it's kind of first come, first served. I'm going to share the link in the chat here as well, but you can also pick it up there or from the QR code. Thank you all for joining. We will follow up with all the slides and a recording of that we did press record, so we'll follow up with that as well. Thanks again for joining, and thank you, Lorenzo, for sharing all your insights.
Thank you all for the attention and the engagement. And yeah, feel free to reach out.
Have a good evening, everyone.